The enemy you never saw coming. What if everything you believed about success was slightly, dangerously wrong? You've read the books, you've watched the videos, you've set the goals, built the habits, and done the work. But something keeps pulling you back. Some invisible force keeps draining your energy before you can reach the finish line. Some unseen hand keeps sabotaging your progress right when things are finally starting to move. Here's the truth. No productivity guru will tell you on their highlight reel. The biggest threat to your success isn't your competition, your circumstances, or even your own mindset. It's the people sitting closest to you. Right now, somewhere in your life, there is at least one person who is quietly, systematically dismantling your confidence, your clarity, and your future. They might be your coworker, your best friend, your partner, your parent. They might even be someone you love deeply. And the most terrifying part? You probably already sense it. You feel it in that specific kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. You feel it in the way certain conversations leave you questioning yourself for days. You feel it in the way your ambition shrinks a little every time you're around them. This isn't a self-help speech about thinking positive thoughts and surrounding yourself with good vibes. This is a strategic intervention, a complete chapter-by-chapter system for identifying who is draining your life, understanding exactly why they do it, and implementing the precise psychological tools to neutralize them permanently. By the time you finish this, you won't just understand toxic people. You will have mastered them. You'll see them coming before they open their mouths. You'll respond with the calm precision of someone who has stopped playing defense and started playing chess. And most importantly, you'll understand something that will quietly revolutionize your entire life. Toxic people are not obstacles in your path. They are mirrors showing you exactly where you have been abandoning yourself. Walking away from them isn't losing something, it's reclaiming everything. Let's begin. The hidden tax. You've been paying your entire life. There's a cost that never shows up on any financial statement, never gets mentioned in any performance review, and never appears in any doctor's diagnosis. But it is absolutely real, and for millions of people across this country, it is the single greatest drain on their potential. It's the cost of toxic people. Not just the dramatic, obvious ones, not just the screaming boss or the explosive partner or the manipulative parent who everyone around you can plainly see. Those are the visible ones, the ones you already know about, the ones doing the most damage. They're invisible. They're the coworker who always has a subtle criticism ready for your best ideas, the friend who celebrates your setbacks just slightly more enthusiastically than your victories, the family member who asks questions that are somehow always shaped like knives, the partner who never quite supports your dreams but frames it as just being realistic. These people are everywhere. Research from organizational psychology suggests that in any given workplace, a single person operating with toxic patterns can reduce team performance by a stunning margin, not through any single dramatic act, but through the slow accumulation of drained energy, second-guessing, and psychological static that follows them everywhere they go. But the real cost isn't in the office, it's in your skull. Think about the last time you had a genuinely difficult interaction with someone who unsettles you. Not a minor annoyance. A real encounter that got under your skin. How long did it live in your head afterward? Hours? Days? Did you replay the conversation? Craft perfect comebacks in the shower? Lie awake running the scenario through your mind on a loop? That mental energy, that creative, executive, ambitious, brain power that you spent rehearsing an argument that already happened, is gone. You cannot get it back. And it was the same energy you needed to finally start that business, write that proposal, have that courageous conversation, or simply show up fully present for someone who actually deserves you. This is the hidden tax, paid in cognitive bandwidth, charged without consent. Most people respond to this tax in one of four ways, and every single one of them makes the situation worse. The first response is appeasement. They figure that if they're just a little more patient, a little more agreeable, a little more accommodating, the difficult person will soften. They absorb the criticism without defending themselves. They apologize for things that weren't their fault. They shrink. And every time they do, the toxic person's behavior is reinforced because appeasement sends one unmistakable signal: this works on you. The second response is rationalization. They try to reason their way through it. They write long explanations in their heads for why the toxic person behaves this way. They research attachment theory. They extend benefit of the doubt after benefit of the doubt. They believe, with genuine heart, that if they can just help the other person understand, things will change. But you cannot logic someone out of behavior that was never driven by logic in the first place. Toxic behavior comes from emotional need, not rational calculation. And you cannot fill someone else's emotional void with your explanations. The third response is retaliation. After enough frustration, they fight back, match the energy, return the manipulation, give the person a taste of their own medicine. This is emotionally satisfying for approximately 30 seconds. Then it backfires, because now you've given the toxic person exactly what they wanted: your full emotional engagement, your reactive energy, and proof that they can pull your strings whenever they choose. The fourth response is chaotic avoidance. They just start dodging. They cancel plans. They go quiet on texts. They take the long way around the office to avoid eye contact. This isn't strategy. This is survival mode. And it leaves you permanently on the defensive, forever reshaping your life around someone else's dysfunction rather than building anything that belongs to you. None of these work. And the reason they don't work is the same reason most people stay stuck in these patterns for years. They're treating toxic behavior as a personal problem when it's actually a strategic one. Toxic people aren't going to disappear from your world. They exist in every industry, every neighborhood, every family tree, and every social circle on Earth. The question isn't whether you'll encounter them. The question is whether you'll be equipped when you do. The most successful, clear-headed, deeply fulfilled people you know haven't figured out how to avoid toxic people. They've figured out how to become completely ungovernable by them. And that is a skill you can learn, starting right now. The 7 faces of toxicity. Know what you're actually dealing with. One of the most expensive mistakes you can make is treating all difficult people the same way. Toxic behavior isn't monolithic. It comes in radically different shapes and requires radically different responses. Using one strategy across the board is like using the same medication for 7 different diseases. It won't just fail to help. It might actively make things worse. Here are the 7 types you need to recognize, understand, and prepare for. Type 1. The energy vampire. These individuals have perfected the art of occupying your emotional space without contributing anything to it. They walk into a room, and somehow all the oxygen changes. They're chronic complainers, perpetual victims, and emotional black holes who feed off attention, sympathy, and the feeling that someone is fully present with their suffering. What makes energy vampires uniquely dangerous is that they rarely seem aggressive. They're often sweet, sometimes pitiable, frequently exhausting. They interrupt your good news to pivot back to their problems. They turn every conversation into a support session where they're the only patient. They don't seem like threats, so you let your guard down. And by the time you realize how depleted you feel, you've already scheduled another coffee with them. Type 2. The controller. Controllers have a compulsive need to own every room they enter. This isn't always the loud, aggressive type, though that exists too. More often, it's the person who always ends up deciding where the group goes for dinner, what the project plan will be, how the family holiday gets organized. They use a rotating toolkit of guilt, fear, flattery, and subtle intimidation to maintain their grip, and they genuinely cannot function in situations where they don't hold the reins. The telltale sign of a controller is how they respond to your autonomy, express an independent preference, make a decision without consulting them, set a boundary, watch what happens. The reaction will tell you everything. Type 3. The narcissist. True narcissists are perhaps the most dangerous entry on this list because their opening presentation is so compelling. They're often charismatic, often intelligent, often the most interesting person in the room during the first few encounters. They're exceptional at something called love bombing, flooding you with attention, admiration, and intimacy in the early stages of a relationship, creating an emotional investment so strong that by the time their actual behavior emerges, you're already too attached to see clearly. Once they have you, the shift is gradual but devastating. Credit flows upward to them. Blame flows downward to you. Your memory of events gets quietly rewritten in their retelling. They don't lie so much as they reconstruct reality with themselves at the center, cast always in the most flattering light. Type 4. The passive-aggressive saboteur. These are the smile and stab artists. They never confront you directly. Direct confrontation would require them to own something, and ownership is not in their repertoire. Instead, they forget commitments. They deliver work just slightly below expectations, with enough plausible deniability to deflect accountability. They make cutting comments wrapped in humor, and then seem genuinely confused when you're upset. They tell your private information to the one person who shouldn't have it, and somehow it's never quite their fault. Passive-aggressive people are extraordinarily effective in professional environments precisely because they leave so little clear evidence. By the time you can articulate exactly what they've done, it sounds paranoid. Type 5. The emotional manipulator. These individuals have weaponized empathy. They know you're a good person. They know you don't want people to suffer because of you, and they use that knowledge with surgical precision. If you really cared about me, after everything I've done, I guess I just don't matter to you. These aren't observations. They're leverage. They're designed to transform your compassion into compliance. Emotional manipulators are most effective with kind, ambitious people who hold themselves to high standards. Because here's the dirty trick. They make your virtues into vulnerabilities. Your empathy becomes their weapon. Your generosity becomes their entitlement. Type 6. The chronic victim. Unlike energy vampires who drain energy through general negativity, chronic victims have a more specific structure. They are always being wronged by everyone, in every situation. Nothing is ever their responsibility, their choice, or their consequence. The world is a conspiracy of circumstances that perpetually conspires against them, and you, if you're not careful, are about to become their most recent explanation for why life isn't working. Chronic victims don't want solutions, they want witnesses. And when you try to offer help rather than testimony, they find ways to explain why your help won't work. They need the victim narrative because it protects them from the terrifying alternative, accountability. Type 7. The boundary violator. These individuals operate as though the social agreements that govern everyone else simply don't apply to them. They show up uninvited. They ask questions that are wildly inappropriate for the relationship. They share information they were clearly trusted with. They cross physical, emotional, and professional lines and then respond with genuine bewilderment when you react. The tell with boundary violators is their framing. They describe their violations as affection. I'm just being real with you. I'm just a touchy person. I'm just trying to help. They've constructed a self-image in which their violations are acts of love, which makes direct confrontation feel like you're punishing someone for caring. Recognizing which type you're dealing with is not an intellectual exercise. It is the first essential step in choosing a response that will actually work, rather than one that will feed the problem further. The psychology behind toxic behavior and why you keep getting targeted. Understanding why toxic people behave the way they do won't make their behavior acceptable, but it will do something far more useful. It will make their behavior predictable, and predictable behavior can be managed. At the root of nearly every form of toxic behavior is the same thing: a deeply fractured relationship with the self. Despite their bravado, their control, their manipulation, toxic people do not fundamentally like themselves. They suffer from what psychologists call emotional dysregulation, an inability to sit with their own internal discomfort without outsourcing it to someone else. Rather than processing their pain internally, they export it. They make it your problem, your burden, your responsibility to absorb or fix. Many toxic people were shaped in environments where this pattern was the only survival strategy available. Children who grew up in unpredictable households, where love was conditional or danger was real, learned to navigate the world through hypervigilance, control, and manipulation. These weren't character flaws, they were adaptations. The tragedy is that adaptations built for a dangerous childhood become weaponized in adult relationships where they're no longer necessary. But here is the single most important thing you need to understand, and it will fundamentally change how you relate to every difficult person in your life. Toxic people don't target weak people, they target successful ones. This is counterintuitive enough that most people never internalize it, and it costs them dearly. Think about it from the toxic person's perspective. What are they actually seeking? Attention, energy, resources, status, admiration, validation. The feeling, however temporary, that they matter, that they have power, that the world owes them something. Where are those things concentrated? In successful, ambitious, high-functioning people. People who have built something, people who have qualities, resources, or energy worth extracting. There's more. Successful people tend to be optimistic and growth-oriented, which means they extend benefit of the doubt longer than they should. They're solution-focused, which means when a toxic person presents a problem, they naturally lean in to help. They're often generous and deeply ethical, which means a skilled manipulator has substantial material to work with. And here's the final devastating piece. Successful people are frequently isolated by their success. When you're operating at a high level, genuine peers are rare. Toxic people fill that gap brilliantly. At first, they arrive with exactly the understanding, enthusiasm, or support that you've been missing. They study you. They mirror you. They become, in the earliest stages, precisely what you needed. And then the real dynamic reveals itself, slowly enough that by the time it's undeniable, you're already in deep. There's a phenomenon in social psychology called the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to attribute other people's bad behavior to temporary circumstances rather than to stable character. When someone treats you badly, your first instinct is to assume they're having a bad day, under unusual stress, didn't mean it the way it came out. Toxic people don't just benefit from this tendency accidentally, they depend on it. They engineer situations that give you easy explanations for their behavior, because easy explanations buy them more time. Here's what changes when you truly absorb this framework. Their behavior stops being about you. When you understand that toxic people's actions are predictable outputs of their internal psychological architecture, not verdicts on your worth, not evidence of your failures, not consequences of anything you did wrong, the emotional charge drains out of every interaction. You stop taking it personally, not because you're suppressing your feelings, but because you genuinely understand that it isn't personal. That shift from emotional target to strategic observer is the foundation of everything that follows. The four traps and the great awakening, the four deadly traps that keep you stuck. Here is what nobody tells you about dealing with toxic people. The patterns that keep you stuck aren't weaknesses. They're the direct result of your best qualities being systematically exploited. You're empathetic, so they trigger the empathy trap. You're rational, so they exploit your faith in logic. You're emotionally engaged, so they hijack your reactions. You're generous and caring, so they activate your savior instincts. The very things that make you a good person are the tools being used to keep you locked in cycles that serve them and cost you everything. Let's dismantle each trap. Trap 1. The empathy trap. Empathy is one of the most powerful capacities a human being can develop. It is also, in the wrong hands, a kill switch for your judgment. When toxic people behave badly and then pivot to vulnerability, when the person who screamed at you yesterday is today's trembling, wounded soul, when the manipulator who just betrayed your trust shows up with tears and a difficult backstory, your empathy fires automatically. You start building the case for them in your own mind. You remind yourself of their childhood wounds, their current pressures, the ways life has treated them unfairly. You find yourself defending them to other people who can see the pattern more clearly than you can. The empathy trap keeps you from acting because action feels like cruelty when you're deep inside it. Every time you approach a decision point, every time the evidence is clear and the right move is obvious, something floods in that makes it feel impossible. Guilt, pity, the story you've constructed about who they could be if only someone loved them enough, which leads directly to trap 4. But first, empathy towards someone who systematically exploits your empathy isn't compassion. It's self-abandonment dressed in compassion's clothing. Trap 2. The logic fallacy. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed the belief that conflict is fundamentally a communication problem, that if two reasonable people can just sit down and lay out the facts clearly enough, understanding will emerge, behaviors will change, and everyone will move forward. This belief works beautifully with reasonable people. Toxic people are not operating from reason. When you spend 3 hours crafting the perfect explanation for why their behavior hurt you, with specific examples, measured tone, and genuinely open body language, and they respond by bringing up something you did in 2019, denying facts that you both witnessed, turning it into a discussion about your sensitivity, and leaving you somehow feeling like you're the one who owes an apology. You've just experienced the logic fallacy in action. Toxic people aren't confused about what they're doing. They're not waiting for the right framing that will finally make them understand. They understand perfectly. They are not interested in understanding. They are interested in winning, in controlling, in keeping you engaged in a game that you don't know you're playing, at rules you weren't given, on a field that tilts permanently in their direction. Every hour you spend trying to reason your way through is an hour you're giving to someone who will use it against you. Trap 3. The reaction addiction. This one is subtler and more insidious than the others because it disguises itself as justified engagement. Toxic people are extraordinarily skilled at finding your triggers. The comment that makes your blood pressure spike. The behavior that makes your hands shake with frustration. The specific tone of voice that unravels you every time. They find these buttons early, they catalog them carefully, and they press them strategically, because your reaction is their currency. When you react, when you get angry, when you defend yourself emotionally, when you take the bait of their provocation, you are paying them. You're confirming that they have power over your internal state, which is the most potent form of control that exists. It doesn't matter that your reaction is righteous. It doesn't matter that any objective observer would agree that your anger is completely justified. The moment you're reacting, they're winning, not because they're right, but because they now own the temperature of your nervous system. The reaction addiction is what it says, an addiction. It feels like doing something. It feels like resistance. But you are dancing to choreography you didn't choose. Trap 4. The savior complex. You've told yourself a story about this person. In the story, they are fundamentally good, fundamentally capable of becoming someone healthy and whole, and what they are missing is the right person, patient enough, wise enough, loving enough to finally reach them. You have cast yourself in that role. This is perhaps the most dangerous trap on the list because it is the one most powered by your genuine love and generosity, and because it contains a seductive promise. If you can just help this person heal, everything will be different. The relationship will transform. The pain will have been worth it. You'll have been the one who made it possible. Here is the truth that the savior complex protects you from. People change when the cost of their current behavior becomes too high, not when someone loves them sufficiently. You cannot outlove someone's dysfunction. You cannot outpatient someone's unwillingness to grow, and every attempt to do so doesn't just exhaust you, it actively shields them from the consequences that might actually catalyze change. The empathy trap keeps you from seeing clearly. The logic fallacy wastes your most valuable resource. The reaction addiction surrenders your emotional autonomy. The savior complex traps you in relationships that were designed to be temporary and turns them into life sentences. Seeing these 4 patterns in yourself isn't cause for shame. It's cause for something far more powerful: clarity. Because you cannot escape a trap you cannot name. The strategic mindset shift that changes everything. Here is the sentence that, if you let it land fully, will reorganize how you operate in every difficult relationship you'll ever have. You cannot control other people's behavior. You have complete control over your response to it. Read that again, not as a motivational platitude, as a structural truth about where power actually lives. Most people spend the majority of their energy in toxic relationships trying to change the other person, trying to make them see, trying to make them behave, trying to engineer the circumstances that will finally trigger their transformation. This strategy will always fail because it requires the one thing you will never have: authority over another person's internal choices. The strategic mindset shift is a complete reorientation away from that futile pursuit. You stop asking, "How do I change this person?" You start asking, "How do I protect myself from this person's patterns while pursuing what matters to me?" This is not resignation. This is not passivity. It is, in fact, the most powerful position available to you. Think about how this changes the game. When you're focused on changing the toxic person, your success is entirely dependent on their cooperation. Every victory is contingent on their willingness to be different. Your peace of mind is held hostage by choices that aren't yours to make. You are, structurally, at their mercy. When you shift to managing your response, when your focus becomes your own behavior, your own boundaries, your own energy, you become completely sovereign. Their choices stop determining your outcomes. They can behave however they choose. You have a plan that doesn't require their participation. The strategic mindset also introduces something toxic people cannot stand: the removal of their reward. Toxic behavior isn't arbitrary. It's functional. It generates specific outcomes that serve the person engaging in it. Attention, control, emotional reactions, access to resources. When you stop providing those outcomes, when your response becomes calm, measured, and unpredictable, the behavior loses its purpose. It stops working, and behavior that doesn't work, eventually, stops. This is why the strategic mindset isn't just psychologically healthy, it's tactically superior. There are 3 more pillars to this shift that deserve careful attention. Pillar 1. Your attention is a finite, precious resource. Every organization understands this about money. You invest where you get returns, and you stop investing where you don't. Very few people apply this principle to their attention, which is a far more non-renewable resource than money. Time can be earned back in various ways. The cognitive bandwidth you spent spinning over a toxic interaction last Tuesday is gone permanently. The strategic mindset treats your attention like the irreplaceable asset it is and allocates it accordingly. Pillar 2. You owe toxic people nothing. Not your patience, not your forgiveness, not your continued presence. This will feel radical if you've been conditioned to believe that being a good person requires endless accommodation. But consider, is it kindness to keep rewarding behavior that harms both you and ultimately the person engaging in it? The most genuinely compassionate thing you can do for a toxic person is to stop making their tactics profitable. That's not cruelty. That is the only intervention that has any real chance of mattering. Pillar 3. Their behavior is information, not a verdict. When someone treats you with contempt, that is not a fact about your worth. It is a data point about their internal state, their psychological patterns, and their emotional capabilities. When you have truly internalized this, not as a coping thought but as a structural understanding, the emotional charge drains out of toxic interactions. You don't get angry at a storm for raining on your plans. You get a raincoat. The strategic mindset is the raincoat. Everything in the chapters that follow is built on this foundation. The tactics only work if the mindset is in place first. The master framework, understanding why. Every tactic fails without this. Before we move into specific tactical systems, there is one more framework you need, because without it, every technique you learn will eventually break down under pressure. The framework is called dynamic response architecture, and it's built on a single observation. Toxic people don't have static strategies. They adapt, they probe, they find the seam in your defense, and they apply pressure there. This means your response system cannot be a fixed script. It must be a flexible, principled structure that adjusts to what they bring. Most guides to dealing with difficult people give you specific lines to say, specific behaviors to model. And those lines and behaviors work until they don't. Until the toxic person shifts tactics, escalates, plays a card you weren't prepared for, and suddenly your carefully rehearsed response sounds hollow and they know they've got you. Dynamic response architecture operates on 3 layers. Layer 1, the core principles layer. These are the non-negotiables that never change regardless of what the toxic person does. Your values, your bottom-line behaviors, the things you will and won't do that are decided in advance, not negotiated in the heat of interaction. This layer is what keeps you grounded when everything else is shifting. You return to it when you're confused, pressured, or unsure. It doesn't matter what they're doing. You know what you're doing. Layer 2, the tactical layer. These are the specific techniques, communication strategies, boundary tools, emotional protection protocols, that you deploy based on which type of toxic person you're dealing with and what the situation requires. This layer is flexible and context-dependent, different tools for different people in different environments. Layer 3, the recovery layer. This is perhaps the most overlooked element in every framework I've encountered. What do you do after the difficult interaction? How do you process the residue, the lingering frustration, the second-guessing, the energy depletion, so it doesn't accumulate into a chronic drain? The recovery layer ensures that individual encounters don't compound into long-term psychological damage. The full system you're about to receive operates across all 3 layers. Keep this architecture in mind as you move through the following chapters. It will help you understand not just what each strategy is, but why it works and where it fits in your overall framework. The complete tactical system. The tactical response system. What actually works for each type. Now we get specific, dealing with energy vampires, the Gray Rock Protocol. The energy vampire's power source is your emotional responsiveness. They feed off engagement, your concern, your solutions, your reactions, your presence. Your goal in any interaction with them is to become as electromagnetically uninteresting as possible. This is called the gray rock method. You become, in essence, a gray rock, inert, unremarkable, not hostile, just completely unengaging. In practice, give short, factual responses with zero emotional content. That sounds frustrating. Full stop. No follow-up questions, no solution offering, no empathetic exploration of their latest crisis. No, oh no, what happened? Which is the oxygen they need. You acknowledge their statement, which is enough to not seem rude, and then immediately redirect or exit. The first few times you try this, it will feel deeply unnatural, especially if you're someone who normally responds with genuine care. Lean into the discomfort. What you are doing is not unkind. It is the only response that doesn't perpetuate the cycle. Over time, energy vampires migrate toward more responsive targets. They are not looking for you specifically. They are looking for a reaction. When you stop providing one, the dynamic shifts. Dealing with controllers. Consistent assertiveness. Without aggression, controllers interpret accommodation as an invitation and aggression as a challenge worth escalating. Neither works. What works is consistent, calm, non-negotiable assertiveness. The key principle with controllers is never justify, never elaborate, never argue. The moment you start defending your boundary is the moment you've opened it to negotiation. Controllers are expert negotiators. They will find the crack in your justification and drive a truck through it. Instead, state your position once, clearly and without apology, and then act consistently with it. I'll have an update ready for our Thursday check-in. Not, I'll have an update ready for our Thursday check-in because I need space to work without constant interruptions, and I've found that micromanagement actually decreases my productivity as demonstrated by research. Stop. The first sentence is enough. The rest is a gift to someone who will use it. Controllers will push back. Stay calm. Repeat the same statement if necessary. Then do exactly what you said you'd do. Nothing more, nothing less. Controllers respect demonstrated reliability and strength. What they cannot handle is someone who means what they say and says nothing extra. Dealing with narcissists. Strategic indifference. Narcissists require a precision calibration that most people never find, because they swing between two extremes, either giving the narcissist too much, the admiration and engagement they crave, or challenging them too directly, which triggers their most destructive retaliation. The sweet spot is strategic indifference. You are present, you are polite, you are completely, elegantly unimpressed. When they fish for admiration, that's interesting, not Wow, that's incredible. Not, I couldn't do that. Just, that's interesting. Then continue. When they brag, listen with mild, non-reactive neutrality. No challenge, no fuel. When they gaslight, I remember it differently. Clean, simple, unshakable. Not, you're wrong, which invites a battle. Just a calm statement of your own experience that you don't defend or justify. The narcissist's deepest wound is irrelevance. Strategic indifference goes to that wound without ever touching it directly. They will eventually move on to someone who gives them the full theatrical engagement they require. Dealing with passive-aggressive saboteurs. Public clarity. Passive-aggressive people depend entirely on your social reluctance to name what's happening. They operate in the space of plausible deniability, and they are masters at making you seem paranoid or difficult for pointing it out. The antidote is to become comfortable making implicit things explicit, calmly, factually, without accusation. This is the third time this has come up. Going forward, I need all commitments confirmed in writing with a status update every 48 hours. You are not accusing them. You are implementing a structure that happens to neutralize their approach entirely. When the behavior continues, you document it, and you implement consequences matter-of-factly. The passive-aggressive person's power evaporates the moment the pattern is named and tracked. Dealing with emotional manipulators, separating feeling from decision. The emotional manipulator's entire toolkit depends on fusing your decisions to their emotional state. The intervention is surgical. You separate them. I hear that you're upset. That doesn't change my decision. These two sentences, delivered calmly and without apology, are among the most powerful in your arsenal. You acknowledge the feeling, you don't dismiss or minimize it, and you make clear that your decisions are made based on your own judgment, not based on someone else's emotional weather. When they escalate, when the upset becomes outrage, when the sadness becomes desperation, you remain compassionate but immovable. I can see this is really hard for you. My answer is still no. The combination of warmth and boundary is what they cannot compute. They are built to exploit guilt. Remove the guilt pathway and the whole machine stalls. Dealing with chronic victims, redirecting to ownership. When a chronic victim brings you their latest crisis, and they always have one, your default response may be to help. Don't, not directly. That sounds really hard. What are you thinking about doing? This is not cold. This is the most genuinely helpful response available because it treats them as a capable adult who can solve their own problems rather than a permanent dependent who needs constant rescue. Notice that you express empathy, you acknowledge it sounds hard, and then immediately redirect to their own agency. Every time you solve a chronic victim's problems for them, you are reinforcing their helplessness and extending the cycle. The most generous thing you can do is refuse to perform that service. Dealing with boundary violators, immediate consistent consequence. With boundary violators, there is only one viable strategy: swift, consistent consequence every single time. No warnings, no "I've told you" before. No hoping they'll figure it out eventually. The moment the boundary is crossed, the consequence lands. If someone shows up to your home uninvited after you've established that visits require advance notice, you speak to them at the door. You tell them this doesn't work without a scheduled time, and you do not let them in. Warm, not cruel, but immovable, every single time. Boundary violators have usually navigated through life by testing limits until the other person gives in. What they haven't encountered is someone who treats every violation as the first violation, with the same calm, immediate response, indefinitely. That consistency is the only language they receive. Emotional protection. Protocols, building your internal armor. External strategies are only half the equation. The other half is what happens inside you. And for most people dealing with toxic individuals, the internal damage is where the real devastation accumulates. Protocol 1. Mental compartmentalization. This is the practiced ability to receive someone's toxic behavior without letting it penetrate your core sense of self. When someone criticizes you unfairly, tries to make you feel guilty, or attacks your character, you have a choice about where that information lands. You can let it into the room where your identity lives, or you can receive it in a separate compartment labeled information about their internal state. Developing this capacity requires something psychologists call an internal locus of control, a stable sense of your own worth and competence that is not dependent on external validation or immune to external criticism. This doesn't develop overnight, but every time you consciously choose to receive toxic behavior as data rather than verdict, you're strengthening the muscle. Protocol 2. Emotional buffering. Toxic people are skilled at emotional contagion, the transfer of their internal state to yours. When someone is furious at you, your nervous system wants to match that frequency. When someone is desperately sad, your empathy wants to absorb it. This is biologically normal. It is also exploitable. Emotional buffering is the practice of acknowledging someone's emotional state without absorbing it. You can say, "I can see you're really angry right now," without becoming angry yourself. You can witness someone's pain without taking it on as your own emergency. Before interactions that you know will be charged, many people find it useful to run a brief visualization. Imagine yourself surrounded by something permeable but protective, something that allows communication through but doesn't let the emotional freight transfer. Protocol 3. Strategic emotional detachment. This is frequently misunderstood as coldness or indifference. It is neither. Strategic emotional detachment means you have disengaged your self-worth from someone else's approval, your mood from their choices, your peace from their dysfunction. You can love people from a position of detachment. You can care about someone's well-being without making their choices your emotional emergency. You can hope for good things for someone while accepting that their behavior is not something you control or are responsible for. This is particularly crucial with family members. The fact that someone is blood does not change the fundamental emotional mathematics. You can love them completely and still refuse to let their dysfunction set the temperature of your life. Protocol 4. Cognitive reframing. Instead of asking, "What does this say about me?" when someone treats you badly, you train yourself to ask, "What does this tell me about them?" This shift is not denial, it is accuracy. The behavior is information about them. The story your emotional brain wants to construct, that their behavior is evidence of your inadequacy, is a narrative, not a fact. With practice, cognitive reframing becomes automatic. You develop a reflex. When someone's behavior stings, you notice the sting, and then you move the data to its correct location. Not in the file labeled evidence of my worth, in the file labeled record of their patterns. Protocol 5. Energy restoration systems. You need a systematic recovery practice, not a vague intention to take care of yourself when you get around to it. Know in advance what restores you: physical exercise, time outdoors, creative work, quality time with people who energize rather than drain you. Schedule these deliberately, especially on days when you know difficult interactions are coming or have just occurred. The goal is not to eliminate depletion entirely. Some depletion is inevitable when you're navigating genuine human complexity. The goal is to have a reliable, practiced system for refilling so that the toxic person's drain never reaches empty. Advanced communication strategies that neutralize manipulation. Normal communication strategies: active listening, collaborative, problem-solving, empathetic reflection, often backfire with toxic individuals because they are designed for good faith interaction. Toxic people are not operating in good faith. You need a different toolkit. Strategy 1. Strategic non-engagement. Some conversations are not miscommunications to be resolved. They are traps to be avoided. Toxic people regularly initiate discussions that have no possible productive outcome, relitigating old grievances, arguing about facts that cannot be changed, pulling you into circular debates whose only purpose is to keep you engaged and reactive. The skill is recognizing these traps before you walk in. When you identify a conversation with no possible positive resolution, you disengage, not with drama, not with lengthy explanation, but cleanly. I don't think this conversation is going to be useful for either of us. And then you physically leave. You don't debate whether it could be useful. You don't justify your exit. You go. Strategy 2. The information diet. Toxic people convert personal information into ammunition. The more they know about your fears, your vulnerabilities, your relationships, your ambitions, the better equipped they are to manipulate you. You don't necessarily have to be hostile about this. You just stop feeding the arsenal. Limit what you share to what is operationally necessary. Keep personal struggles, financial situations, relationship dynamics, and career anxieties out of conversations with people who have demonstrated they cannot be trusted with them. You can be warm and engaged without being an open book. Strategy 3. Emotional validation without agreement. This is the middle path between total validation, which accepts their framing, and dismissal, which escalates things. You acknowledge their emotional experience without endorsing their interpretation of events. I can see you're really frustrated. This is emotional validation. You're right that I did something wrong. This is agreement. These are not the same sentence, and conflating them is how people end up accepting blame they don't owe. You can validate someone's emotional experience thoroughly and completely while having no agreement whatsoever about what caused it or what should be done about it. Strategy 4. The broken record. When someone is using persistence to wear you down, asking the same thing repeatedly in different ways, escalating pressure, cycling through guilt and anger and pleading, the broken record technique cuts through all of it. You have one response. You repeat it calmly and without elaboration every time they cycle through. That's not something I'm able to help with. That's not something I'm able to help with. I understand that's frustrating. That's not something I'm able to help with. The consistency removes the variability they're searching for. There's nothing to probe, nothing to exploit. Just the same sentence, warm and immovable. Strategy 5. Strategic. Questions. Instead of making statements that can be attacked, you ask questions that force clarity. When someone says, "If you really cared, you would do this," you ask, "What makes you believe that's the only way to demonstrate care?" You're not being aggressive. You're requiring them to defend the logic rather than letting the emotional implication do the work unchallenged. Strategic questions work because they shift the burden of articulation. Manipulation depends on implication. When you require explicit articulation, the manipulation often collapses under the weight of its own incoherence. Strategy 6. Time limiting. Before you enter any interaction with a known toxic person, you decide how long you're investing. You announce this at the start. I have about 10 minutes for this. You stick to it. When the time is up, you leave, not as punishment, not as drama, but as the straightforward completion of what you said you'd do. Time limiting does two things. It prevents the extended engagement that toxic people depend on, and it models, consistently, that your time has boundaries they cannot simply override with escalation. Systems, decisions, and difficult domains. The strategic decision matrix, fight, manage, or exit 1, of the most costly mistakes in dealing with toxic people, is responding to every situation with the same approach. Sometimes you fight to change the dynamic. Sometimes you stay and implement maximum protection. Sometimes you leave. The art is knowing which situation calls for which response. The strategic decision matrix evaluates every toxic relationship on 4 variables. Variable 1, stakes. How significant is this relationship to your material goals, your career, your family, or your financial stability? A toxic direct supervisor has different stakes than a toxic person in a hobby group. Assess this honestly, without letting loyalty or habit inflate the stakes beyond their reality. Variable 2, leverage. How much genuine ability do you have to shift the dynamic? This depends on your relative position, the other person's level of psychological dysfunction, the consequences available to you, and the institutional support you can access. Some people are genuinely manageable with consistent strategy. Others, particularly those with severe personality disorders or active addictions, are functionally immovable. Variable 3, cost. What is this relationship actually costing you, not just in dramatic moments, but in the accumulated weight of constant management, the chronic stress, the cognitive bandwidth, the secondary effects on your other relationships and your creative and professional output? These costs are often invisible because they're so normalized, but they're real. Variable 4, alternatives. Is this relationship providing something truly irreplaceable, or have you simply not created the alternatives that would make it easier to change the terms? These 4 variables produce 4 categories. High stakes, high leverage. You fight. You invest strategically in changing the dynamic through documentation, boundary enforcement, consequence implementation, and alliance building. This is worth your full effort. High stakes, low leverage. You stay and protect. You accept that the relationship won't become ideal, and you build the maximum protection architecture: minimized contact, strict information diet, full emotional buffering, comprehensive documentation. You are not trying to fix anything. You are managing your exposure while protecting your goals. Low stakes, high leverage. You choose. You have flexibility. You can invest some effort in improvement if the relationship has genuine potential, or you can simply reduce contact without extensive intervention. Don't invest more than the relationship's actual importance warrants. Low stakes, low leverage. You exit. You remove this person from your active life as efficiently as possible without elaborate explanation or extensive effort. Decline the invitations, mute the channels, redirect the energy. Don't perform a dramatic exit, just gradually, completely reduce access until there is none. The matrix is not permanent. Reevaluate regularly. Circumstances shift, relationships evolve. Your own position changes. Someone who was once high stakes may become irrelevant as your life develops. Someone with low leverage over you now may eventually become more or less so. The matrix is a decision-making tool, not a life sentence. Toxic workplaces, navigating professional poison. Without ending your career, the workplace is the most complex arena for dealing with toxic people because your options are structurally limited. You cannot simply exit a toxic coworker the way you can exit a toxic friendship. Your income, your career trajectory, and your professional reputation are all at stake in a way they aren't in personal relationships. This demands a more nuanced, more patient, and more strategically sophisticated approach. The perception principle. In professional settings, how you handle difficult situations matters as much as what's actually happening. Every interaction with a toxic colleague is visible to someone who is forming impressions about your judgment, your resilience, and your character. The goal is not just to survive the interaction. It's to emerge from it appearing to be exactly the kind of person others want to work with and promote. This means maintaining professional equanimity even when someone else is visibly not. When a toxic colleague erupts or behaves inappropriately, your calm, measured response is a competitive advantage. It demonstrates contrast, it communicates character, and it builds the credibility that makes their behavior, over time, appear as isolated as it actually is. The paper trail system. Documentation in professional settings is not paranoia, it is infrastructure. After important conversations, send a brief follow-up email summarizing what was discussed and what was agreed. Copy appropriate stakeholders when transparency serves the work. Create a running log of incidents that affect deliverables, noting dates, what occurred, who was present, and the professional impact. This documentation exists for two purposes: protecting you if the situation escalates, and creating accountability that changes behavior. People who know their actions are being tracked consistently tend to track their actions more carefully. Managing toxic bosses. The power dynamic with a toxic superior is genuinely different from peer relationships, and strategies that work with colleagues often backfire here. Direct confrontation is rarely an option. Strict information diet is wise. What works is a counterintuitive strategy. Give them what they need while protecting what you need. Most toxic bosses are running on insecurity and a desperate need for control and recognition. Give it to them strategically. Update them more frequently than strictly necessary. Acknowledge their input visibly. Ask for their perspective in front of others. This isn't sycophancy, it's resource management. You are allocating a small, calculated amount of attention to their needs in exchange for the space to do your actual work and protect your trajectory. Simultaneously, document your own contributions meticulously, build relationships with other leaders in the organization, and develop the skills that make you valuable beyond this single reporting relationship. You are making yourself simultaneously comfortable in the current situation and independent of it. Alliance architecture. Isolation is the condition in which toxic behavior thrives. A well-documented track record, known to respected people throughout your organization, is the most powerful protection available. Not through gossip or conspicuous coalition building that creates enemies. Through consistent excellence and the genuine professional relationships that develop when you deliver, support others, and maintain your integrity under pressure. The allies you need are people who can speak from direct experience about the quality of your work and your character. That credibility is built over time through behavior, not through conversations about how difficult someone is. The family dimension. When the toxic person shares your last name, family relationships sit in their own category of complexity because they carry the weight of history, the pressure of cultural expectation, the tangle of genuine love and genuine harm, and the reality that you cannot simply remove these people from your narrative the way you can exit other relationships. The first thing to dismantle is what might be called the loyalty fallacy. The deeply conditioned belief that family relationships deserve unlimited forbearance, regardless of the quality of treatment they deliver. This belief is understandable. It has cultural and emotional roots that go deep. And it is also a mechanism by which toxic family members are protected from any consequences for their behavior, which means they have no incentive whatsoever to change it. The corrective is not to stop loving your family. It is to recognize that love is not the same as unlimited access. You can love someone completely and Still refuse to let their behavior into your home, your finances, your professional life, or your emotional core. These are not contradictory positions. Toxic parents. The parent-child relationship carries a specific psychological freight that no other relationship quite matches. If your parents were toxic, their treatment of you likely shaped fundamental beliefs about your worth, your capabilities, and what you deserve from others, beliefs that continue operating in your adult life long after you've left the household. The essential reframe is this: your parents' behavior toward you was a product of their limitations, their trauma, and their psychological state. It was not a verdict on your worth. Children naturally assume that how they're treated reflects what they deserve. Adults have the ability to question that assumption, and the mental health to do so is worth whatever it takes to build it. Setting boundaries with parents as an adult will feel, for a while, like one of the hardest things you've done. Other family members may criticize it. The toxic parent will likely escalate before they adjust. Your own guilt will be a formidable opponent. None of that changes the underlying math. You cannot maintain your own well-being and build the life you're capable of while remaining permanently available to behavior that dismantles you. Holiday events and forced proximity, the annual occasions that bring families together, are often the settings where the most predictable toxic patterns play out, with the added pressure of audience, nostalgia, and expectation. The strategic approach is advanced planning rather than reactive management. Before any significant family event, decide how long you'll be present, which topics are off limits for you, how you'll respond to the 2 or 3 most predictable provocations, and what your exit plan is if things become untenable. Bring someone who grounds you if you can. Stay somewhere with privacy and separation if possible. Give yourself permission to leave when you said you would. Not when they're finished, not when the atmosphere finally improves, but when your time is up. Managing family information. The information diet principle applies with particular force in family systems where personal information travels along informal networks that you cannot fully map or control. Share general, positive updates. Keep specific details about your finances, your relationship struggles, your professional challenges, and your ambitions private. This isn't deception. It's the recognition that certain family members will use specific information in ways you haven't consented to. You are building a life. The details of how you're building it are yours to share strategically, not an obligation to broadcast to everyone who shares your bloodline. Long-term mastery. Building a toxic-proof life system. The highest level of this work is not just learning to handle individual toxic people as they appear, it's engineering an environment over time where toxic behavior is structurally difficult and increasingly rare. Conscious social architecture. Most people inherit their social environment. They end up with the colleagues their industry sorted them into, the friends proximity delivered, the family history assigned. Very few people actively design who they spend time with, who has access to their energy, and what relational norms govern their closest circles. Conscious social architecture is the practice of intentionality. You conduct an honest audit of your current relationships. Which ones consistently energize, support, and challenge you productively? Which ones consistently drain, undermine, or destabilize you? This audit is not an exercise in judgment. It is resource allocation. You have finite time and attention. Where you invest it matters enormously. Once you see the patterns, you begin making intentional adjustments. Not dramatic exits necessarily, but gradual reallocation. Less time and access for the draining relationships. More investment in the energizing ones. Over months and years, the overall composition of your social world shifts. The average quality of your daily interactions improves. The chronic background drain reduces. Environmental design for boundary clarity. Your physical and digital environments can either support healthy relational norms or undermine them. When your phone is a device you check constantly, it gives everyone in your contact list unlimited, unannounced access to your attention. When your calendar is open to anyone who wants to fill it, your time is not yours. It belongs to whoever is most demanding. Structure your environments to reflect your actual priorities. Designate specific times for communication and protect the rest. Create physical spaces that belong to your work, your creativity, your recovery. Turn off notifications that serve other people's urgency at the expense of your focus. These structural choices are not minor, convenience adjustments. They are the architectural decisions that determine whether your life is yours or whether it's managed by everyone else's needs. The Personal Standards Framework. At the foundation of a toxic-proof life is something simple: clarity about what you will and will not accept, not as a performance of toughness, but as a genuine values-based understanding of how you need to be treated to function at your best and contribute your best to the people who matter. When these standards are clear and consistently enforced, not with drama, not with lectures, but through the quiet consistency of your behavior, most people will adjust naturally. And the ones who won't? They self-select out, not because you've pushed them away aggressively, but because the conditions you've created simply don't reward the behavior they rely on. This is the ultimate shift, from someone who manages toxic people case by case, exhaustively, reactively, to someone whose life is structured so that toxic dynamics never quite find purchase. Recovery, healing the damage and rebuilding trust. If you have spent significant time in toxic relationships, in a household, a long-term partnership, a manipulative friendship, a toxic organizational culture, you carry the mark of it, not as a permanent condition, as a starting point. The damage from sustained toxic relationships is real and specific: eroded self-trust, hypervigilance, a distorted relationship with your own perceptions, because those perceptions were systematically questioned and undermined, anxiety that outlasts the relationship that caused it, a complicated relationship with your own needs because asserting those needs was once dangerous or futile. These are not weaknesses. They are normal responses to abnormal conditions, and they are reversible. Reality recalibration. The first task in recovery is rebuilding trust in your own perceptions. Gaslighting, the systematic dismissal of your memory, your interpretations, and your emotional responses, leaves people profoundly uncertain about their own inner experience. The antidote is gentle, consistent practice. Keep a journal, not to process for others' eyes, to establish your own record of your thoughts, feelings, and experiences without editing or second-guessing. Notice when you automatically assume you're wrong. Practice validating your own observations without seeking external confirmation. When something feels off, honor that signal rather than overriding it in favor of someone else's reassurance. Your intuitive sense of people and situations is almost certainly more reliable than you've been led to believe. Boundary reconstruction. People who have navigated long-term toxic relationships often lose their connection to their own needs. They've been focused for so long on managing someone else's state, walking carefully around someone else's reactions, that the question, "What do I actually want?" can feel genuinely foreign. Start with small things. Choose what to eat without consulting anyone. Decline an invitation to something you don't want to attend. Express a preference that might not align with someone else's. These small acts of self-reference are not selfish. They're the rebuilding of a capacity that was taken from you. Trust rebuilding. After toxic relationships, people tend to land in one of two extremes: trusting no one or trusting everyone indiscriminately because the distinction feels too complex and exhausting. Neither is sustainable. Healthy trust is earned incrementally. Watch what people do over time, not what they say in a single conversation. Notice whether they follow through. Notice whether they handle your vulnerability with care. Share small things first and observe. Build trust the way you'd build a structure, one verified layer at a time, with no shortcuts and no shortcuts required. Self-compassion as infrastructure. The internal critic installed by toxic people is often the most persistent residue. Long after the person is gone, their voice continues operating, cataloging your inadequacies, questioning your judgment, telling you that you're too sensitive, too demanding, not enough. The intervention is not to argue with this voice. It is to replace it over time with something truer. When you notice the internal critic firing, ask, "Would I say this to someone I love in this situation?" If not, you don't have to accept it as accurate. You can practice speaking to yourself with the same basic dignity you'd offer to any person who is doing their best in a complex world. That's not indulgence. That is the restoration of something fundamental. Maintaining the edge, how successful people stay protected, while building everything. The final chapter is about what this all looks like at scale, not just surviving toxic people, thriving in spite of them, not just defending your energy, channeling it into something extraordinary. The most successful people in any domain have not figured out how to avoid difficult personalities. That's impossible at any meaningful level of achievement. What they've figured out is how to pass through those encounters without losing altitude, how to metabolize the friction into forward momentum rather than letting it create drag. The fuel reframe. Every time a toxic person tries to diminish what you're building, you have a choice about what you do with that energy. You can absorb it as discouragement, or you can receive it as information. I must be moving in a direction that represents something they feel threatened by. This isn't delusion, this is pattern recognition. People who are comfortable and unaffected by your trajectory don't try to undermine it. The opposition is evidence of motion. The people who are working hardest to clip your wings are usually the clearest signal that you have them. Use that signal accordingly. The reputation compound effect. Every interaction with a difficult person is a public demonstration of your character. How you behave under pressure, with what level of integrity, what degree of composure, what quality of judgment, is being observed, consciously or unconsciously, by everyone around you. Over years, this accumulates into something that no single impressive performance can build, a reputation for being someone who can be trusted with hard things. That reputation is worth protecting with your life. Not with perfection. You'll make mistakes, and how you handle them is also part of the record, but with consistent commitment to the values you've identified as yours, regardless of what someone else is doing in the same moment. Your success as justice. Here is what I want to leave you with. Toxic people count on a specific outcome from their behavior, that their targets will be smaller for the encounter, that the person who walked in with ambition and energy will walk out with a little less of both, that the accumulation of this, encounter after encounter, year after year, will eventually produce someone manageable, someone who has learned not to want too much, reach too far, or take up too much room. The most complete, comprehensive, and permanent answer to toxic behavior is a life that proves it didn't work. Not revenge, not exposure, not the satisfaction of watching them face consequences, though sometimes that happens. A life built on exactly the values, the ambitions, and the self-respect that they tried to eliminate. A life that looks, every single day, like the full expression of who you were before anyone tried to make you smaller. That is not just personal victory. That is a model. Every person watching you build that life, every colleague, every friend, every person coming up behind you, learns something from it. They learn that integrity doesn't require you to lose, that strategy and values aren't opposed, that the person who refuses to become toxic in response to toxicity doesn't end up defeated, they end up free. Toxic people are not the obstacles in your path. They are the mirrors showing you where you had not yet fully claimed your own boundaries, your own worth, your own voice. Every one of them, as infuriating as this is to say, has been a teacher, a harsh one, an uninvited one whose lessons came at significant cost. But here you are, clear-eyed, equipped, with a strategic system where once there was only confusion and an exhausted heart. Now go build the life they tried to convince you couldn't have.